Well, let me look back over my lifetime. And when I was a student, I loved to read science fiction. I can remember reading I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. And I thought all of this stuff was just around the corner, much as we thought after watching 2001 A Space Odyssey that we'd have cities on the moon by the year 2000. And it was a very disappointing few decades when it looked like robotics and what we now call AI were really going nowhere, that it had been greatly overblown. But then suddenly, I think in the last 20 years, it all seemed to come together and there were huge advances. I even remember a meeting at Google where not so many years ago, where a friend of mine suggested that they should put more effort into devices that would translate languages. So if you go to a restaurant in China, you could speak in English and the waiter would see it in Chinese. This has happened. So enormous advances. But I think in the context of what we're trying to achieve at this meeting, that we're less concerned with the sort of gee-whizzery. It's obvious that amazing things can be done and done very efficiently and better than human beings. But the intelligence is, I think, the second issue. I think what we're all more concerned about is consciousness, something like that, self-awareness, moral direction, and so forth. In other words, we're not terribly much frightened by a system that flies a plane better than, or even drives a car better than a human being once we get used to it. But when we get into the area of simulating not just intelligence, but making the claim that we can build a system that is conscious, is in some sense a being, and may or may not have some sort of moral awareness, then that starts to get much more scary. And if we then go to even further in the future to the notion that such beings might displace humans, so we would be sort of irrelevant, then that raises huge numbers of questions. So I think intelligence is not really the right thing to dwell on. It is really more aspects of consciousness, self-awareness, moral values, and so forth.
Well, just to follow up on that, Paul, do you consider, is consciousness just a form of computation then? Or is it something not just quantitatively, but qualitatively different than calculation?
There's a deep philosophical problem, which is, of course, well known, which is how do we know if something is conscious? And people have arguments, is my dog conscious? And most dog owners think that their dogs are conscious. And then if you had a sort of robotic dog that responded in the same way, could you attribute consciousness to it? Well, Alan Turing, one of the founders of this entire discipline, came up with this notion of the Turing test. So am I talking to Barry, a real conscious human being, or is this some sort of simulation that is responding appropriately, but without any awareness of what it is doing? And how can I tell the difference? If you can design a system that can respond appropriately in a way that's indistinguishable from another human being, then according to the Turing test, you would attribute consciousness to it. But it is just by analogy. I know I am conscious. You behave in a manner similar to me, and so I attribute consciousness to you. But it's really only a working hypothesis. I cannot know you are conscious without being you, and then, of course, I wouldn't be me. So this is deep philosophical problem's always been there of attributing consciousness to something else. And I think probably most people would go on the basis of familiarity, that if you had a robot or something like that around that was so well designed that it responded appropriately, you would treat it as if it's conscious. But whether it really is, it's called the hard problem of consciousness, whether you can really say it is conscious, it's a problem that I'm not sure we will ever solve. It may be beyond the scope of science to actually solve it.